All right, Ariel. So the prologue is called Dragon Mount. And you've heard my long reading of it where I gave you the entire thing verbatim as best as I could manage. So I would recommend that you actually listen to that first. But I'm going to assume no knowledge kind of thing, like you don't remember. And so we're just going to go over it. And I'm doing all this like live. I have not practiced or anything, so if something doesn't sound great, I'm sorry, but it's intended to be nice. Yeah, so okay, here we go, baby. So Dragon Mount. It starts out with a man who's just wandering in a broken house, and he's calling out, "Ilyina, Ilyina," over and over again. And as he's walking, he steps over dead bodies and torn tapestries on the walls, and clearly there was some kind of disaster that happened. And as he's shouting, seemingly unable to even notice the carnage around him that something wrought, someone comes up to him, a man, and this man looks at the original man, the man who seems to have lost his mind, and calls him Lews Therin. Lews Therin being the madman. And he confronts Lews Therin, saying, "You don't even realize what is happening." And Lews Therin not understanding, and we have no context for this at this point. Lews Therin is just saying, "Oh, we have a guest, Ilyina, my wife, my beautiful, lovely wife. Please, where are you? Stop hiding. We have to welcome this guest into our home and have a feast and everything. Welcoming strangers." And the man just looks over at the corpse at his feet, and the golden-haired woman's laying there. Very much implied that that woman dead at Lews Therin's feet is Ilyina, who at this point we come to recognize as his wife. And so the man, apparently enraged by Lews Therin not understanding what happened, speaks to Lews Therin and says, you have wrought all of this and you don't even realize what has happened. I serve the Dark One, and I will make you understand what you have done. And he grabs Lews Therin by the head, and Lews Therin screams and then understands what has happened around him. He looks over at the body. He looks over at the dead children, the destroyed building, and the loudest scream that has ever torn from his lungs came out. And Lews Therin, realizing that he has in fact murdered his entire family, stares at them, and the man, named Elan Morin Tadronai, and you'll have to forgive me, a lot of the names I've never had to say loud, he almost mocks Lews Therin. "See what you've done, see the consequences of your actions." And Lews Therin, in his grief, rips open a hole in space and steps through this hole. When he's on the other side, he's in a wide open plain, and he draws upon Saidin, and he feels on it. At this point, you understand this Sidon or Sadin. I think it's pronounced Sidon. I've always called it Sadin in my head. So I'll probably continue to call it Sadin just because it's easier than correcting myself 1,000 times. But Lews Therin, you understand at this point, Sadin is some kind of force, some kind of magic. And as he's touching it, he realizes, the Dark One, whatever the Dark One is, the Dark One has touched Sadin. He has corrupted our source of power, of magic, and he feels a slimy ooze on the top of it in his mind, almost like touching it is poisonous in itself. But Lews Therin doesn't care, and he delves through the sludge in his mind and holds on to Satan. And within him, he takes in so much of Satan, so much of the magic, that it talks about how any other man who dared to try that would be burned to a cinder. But Lews Therin doesn't care. He takes it, and he takes more and more and more until it's impossible to even look in his general direction. Not that anyone was near him within hundreds of miles. And he channels all of this power down into the earth and straight up, and the ground collapses, and everything around him rises, and he is crushed. But when the dust has settled, we see a mountain, the largest mountain that anyone at that time had ever seen or even dreamed about, created on the death spot, the grave of Lews Therin Telamon, who was known to be the dragon, the man who fought the Dark One, who led 100 of his channelers up to where the Dark One's prison is and sealed him away. And you learn, because Elan Morin, he also rips open a hole in reality, steps into where this giant mountain, this volcano of death and lava at this time has settled. And he talks about how at this point, it doesn't matter, Lews Therin, that you've escaped me through death. We have fought this battle an untold number of times, and we will continue to fight it until time immortal. And eventually, the Dark One will win. And then time itself will end. The dragon has died. Elan Morin goes away. And the chapter ends. And it tells us 3,000 years ago is when this happened. But if I may get something up here. I'm working on the computer. Because at the end of this, it says, Elan Morin says, "You cannot escape so easily, dragon. It is not done between us. It will not be done until the end of time." And then he was gone, and the mountain and the island that was created stood alone, waiting. And this chapter ends with what appears to be a reading of a book of some kind. And it is from Aleth Nin Terin Alta Camora, titled The Breaking of the World. And it reads, "And the shadow fell upon the land, and the world was riven stone from stone. The oceans fled, and the mountains were swallowed up, and the nations were scattered to the 8 corners of the world. The moon was as blood, and the sun was as ashes. The seas boiled, and the living envied the dead. All was shattered, and all but memory lost, and one memory above all others, of him who brought the shadow and the breaking of the world. And they named him Dragon." There is a second reading to end the chapter from Karl Drianan to Kalaman, titled The Cycle of the Dragon. And it reads, "And it came to pass in those days, as it had come before and would come again, that the dark lay heavy upon the land, and weighed down the hearts of men. And the green things failed, and hope died. And men cried out to the Creator, saying, O light of the heavens, light of the world, let the promised one be born of the mountain according to the prophecies, as he was in ages past, and will be in ages to come. Let the Prince of the morning sing to the land, that green things will grow, and the valleys give forth lambs. Let the arm of the Lord of the dawn shelter us from the dark, and the great sword of justice defend us. Let the dragon ride again on the winds of time. That is the end of the prologue. Chapter 1 is titled An Empty Road, and this takes place in the year 998 in their time. And I won't talk about the years very often, but it's good to know when and where books start. So I won't be quite as in depth as the prologue for a lot of the chapters. I'll cover the important things, but I also still want to give you some world building that happens, because he's very good at his world building, and it's through these little things that he does. He detailed descriptions, but also the breadth of everything that he describes. He doesn't just say a woman was wearing a scarf. He says the air was cold, so the woman was wearing a scarf. It looked like it was purchased many years ago, and that gives you insight into how the land that they're in is poor or not as well off. And he'll talk about the sandals, but that goes into the climate that they're in, right? Like if it's muddy or something. There's a whole bunch of things like that tie in and help you get a visual of how things look. So you're not going to get as much of that with the summaries. But if there's something that I can just think of or that I figured was important, I will be sure to mention it. And right now it's going to be easier with the first 3 or 4 books because I've read these recently. When we get into the later ones, it may be more difficult, but I will do my best. So anyway, chapter 1, An Empty Road. We find a man called Tam who is on a horse, and he is riding from a farm with his son, Rand al'Thor. And you gain from this that they are living in the long outskirts of a small village called Eamon's Field. And they're going to celebrate Beltane. So apparently they provide some goods for the festivities, some probably alcohol for the inn there, and then everyone can have a celebration. And we don't really know what Beltane is, but it sort of comes across as a like Christmas celebration almost. In the special things that they point out, like there's a large pole in the center of town, and the girls will each take a ribbon that are connected to the top, and they will run around in a circle in it, and it's like something about it allows them to pick a boy to dance with and things, and it's very adorable. But it's also just a fun time to eat, drink, be merry, and forget the weariness of the world and how hard the harvests have been lately, right? But as Rand al'Thor is riding along, he notices in the distance a man riding a black horse. The man himself is in pure black, and he can make out no details of this man. But what he does notice is that the wind which was blowing did not move the cloak of the man at all. And this disturbed Rand. He brought it up to Tam, his father. Tam didn't see it, though. Tam wasn't looking that way. He was keeping his eyes out, potential hunting or just on the road. But as it stands, Rand forgets about it. He decides it was probably my imagination. Getting ahead of himself, right? And so Rand and Tam continue on to the town, and they find the town, in fact, and it's lovely. There's small children and dogs running around a cart, but the harvest has been rough, and men are just saying, we'll survive the light willing, and if the light doesn't will it, well, we'll still survive. Because the people in this land, as you get from the conversations, they're very hardy people. They don't just give up. They're very, the word here that they often give is stubborn, right? They're very stubborn. And you learn about, as they're walking into town, a man, Conger, an old crotchety bastard, comes up to them and is like, what are we going to do about Nynaeve, al'Thor? And he's like, we can't have a wisdom like that for Eamon's Field. But Tam is like, Jesus, I don't have time for this. This isn't our place, Conger. That's who the wisdom of our village is. That's up to the women to decide. We have other things to do. We managed to get a decent enough harvest. Or rather, Nynaeve, according to Conger, said we would have a good harvest. Conger says, and we did not. And so now, when she listens to the wind, she just gets angry when you ask her what she's hearing. And he's like, Nynaeve is too young to be wisdom, and if the women's circle of the village won't do it, then the village council has to. And from that, you kind of gather, like, there's two sort of governments in their little town. One's run by all the men, and one's run by all the women, and they stay out of each other's business, Like, at one point, a woman hears this, hears Whit Conger complaining and says, "You try meddling in women's circle business and see how you like eating your own cooking, which you won't do in my kitchen. And you'll wash your own clothes and make your own bed, which won't be under my roof." And the man just deflates and he goes inside, all defeated, and it's hilarious. So with the first enemy of the book defeated, they continue on and they keep going, and they notice the festival's already going, and girls have started to braid their hair, which in Eamon's Field you gather is something you can only do when you're of age. You have to be considered an adult woman to braid your hair. And so the women who are excited for Beltane are starting to braid their hair. And they make it to the inn, and they're given the goods that they brought and everything, and that's pretty good. And then as the adults are talking, Rand's standing there, and he gets a little tug on his jacket, and it's another boy. And then you understand this is Mat Cauthon. He's crouching behind a cart, and he's like, "We caught a badger. It's all grouchy at being pulled out of its den. We're gonna set it loose and watch all the girls run." And Rand starts smiling, quite, not laughing because he doesn't want the adults to hear, but he's smiling. He's like, he's thinking to himself, it doesn't sound as much fun as it would have a couple of years ago, but it is funny, and Mat never seems to really grow up to be an adult, so he's like, alright, he's like, "I gotta unload all this cider we brought, but I'll meet you later for it." And Mat's all like, "Oh my god, come on." And then he's like, there's so many, Mat says, "There's so many exciting things happening. We've got strangers in the Two Rivers and stuff." And Rand, stops breathing. He's like, "Did you see a man in black? Like, his cloak didn't move in the wind?" Mat's grin just disappears. He's like, "You saw him too?" Like, "He scared me." And Rand was like, "Me too." And then they start thinking about it. And then here's where you gather, Mat says, it might be the Dark One himself. And he tries to laugh, but he can't really do it. And Rand says, and this is important, Rand says, "The Dark One and the Forsaken are bound in Sheol Ghul, beyond the Great Blight, bound by the Creator at the moment of creation until the end of time. And the hand of the Creator shelters the world, and light shines on us all." And plus he says, besides, if the Dark One was free, what would he be doing? What would the Shepherd of the Night be doing in the Two Rivers watching a couple farm boys? Mat's not entirely convinced by that, to be honest, though. And so that's basically it for the first chapter. And he starts thinking about Beltane a little bit as he's unloading some cider. And he thinks of the innkeeper's daughter, Egwene. And he starts getting very nervous, because he and Egwene have been promised to each other, more or less, since they were kids. And he's pretty nervous about dancing with her at Beltane. So he does his best to put her out of his mind, and grab these big barrels of cider and lug them away. And he's like, maybe she won't be there after all at Beltane. But that really didn't make him feel any better. All right, chapter 2 is titled Strangers. And I can make this one a little quicker, but basically, uh, everyone's excited about some strangers that have come into town, but they don't appear to be talking about the man or creature or whatever it is in black. Um, and as Matt and Rand are talking with each other, uh, he stares, or I'm sorry, a raven comes up and stares at Matt and Rand. Um, And while the raven is staring at them, someone's talking about a lady and her somewhat like a bodyguard that have come into town. And someone tells them her name is Moraine, and she just heard it through conversation. She was eavesdropping. The Lady Moraine, and her man is named Lan, and the Wisdom does not like her, but I do. And they're like, well, why wouldn't the Wisdom like her? And apparently, Moraine asked the Wisdom, Nynaeve, for directions in the morning and called her a child. Um, and, she didn't know that Nynaeve was the Wisdom and apologized when she found out. But by that point, Nynaeve had already made up her mind. And they talk about how last year, when an old man in the village called her a child, she thumped him on the head with a stick, and he's on the village council and old enough to be her grandfather. So that's not something that's easy to get through. And then they were also talking about another visitor who is going to come, a Glee Man. And everyone perks up. Oh my god, a Glee Man? Oh boy, that's crazy. And you really get a sense that a Glee Man is not something normal here. And it's almost like a storyteller or a theater man, someone who can kind of excite you and provide you some entertainment, which isn't something they really have here a lot. But as they finish a conversation, they notice the raven again, and it's still staring at them this entire time. And Rand's like, have you ever seen a raven do that, Matt? And Matt's like, no. And then someone says, a vile bird. And it's a woman's voice. And she says, to be mistrusted in the best of times. And the raven lurched itself in the air so violently, feathers fall down from the roof. And it flies away. And it turns out the lady that had spoken behind them seemed to be an actual lady. And by lady in historical, for you, Ariel, historically it is like a person of nobility, of high stature, right? So like most people are commoners, or they're peasants. A lady is someone to be respected, just like a lord, right? They rule land, they have nice things, they are rich, and they are powerful. And so they think to themselves, this person has to be the Lady Moraine, because she is as extravagant and beautiful as everything that they had been told in this morning. But she's not that old, Rand was thinking. Like, he actually had trouble putting an age on her. First, she was like, she's about the same age as Nynaeve. But the longer he looked, he was like, there's some kind of maturity and like a hint of knowing that she isn't young. And he thought that her eyes were deep pools about to swallow him up, right? And she has an air of command and grace about her, and tall enough to come up to his chest, so but barely. So she's not super tall. And Rand is a very tall guy, a lot taller than the other people in the village, actually. And Rand is like a red-haired, very tall man. He really stands out in this village that is mostly like darker-haired, not short people, but average height people. So in my head, I've always put that as like everyone's in the fives and Rand's at like the mid 6 feet mark, something like that, like significantly taller than a lot of people. And they're like, oh, good morning, Lady Moraine. And she's like all happy, and she's like, don't call me lady, just Moraine. Who are you guys? And she sounds happy and everything. And they have a whole conversation and stuff, but she's just talking with them, and she hands them coins. She says, tell you what, I'll give you guys some coins. And she says, I may have some tasks that need to be done, so please have a silver coin, and then I can call upon you when I need something done, right? And they're like, you don't need to give us anything. She's like, of course, you don't work for nothing, but agree to come when I ask it, because we have a bond now. And so Matt and Rand take their coin, and they're like, why are you even here? And she's like, I study history. I'm a collector of old stories, and I want to know what has happened long ago here and at other places. And she says, they're like, she's like, what happened in the Two Rivers? Which is you kind of get that the Two Rivers is like the area, and Eamon's Field is just their town within the Two Rivers. And so they're like, what happened in the Two Rivers to make you interested? And she's like, and then Matt adds in, like, what else would you call it beside Two Rivers anyway? And she's like, places where many names as the wheel of time turns, And no one can know the great pattern the wheel weaves, or even the pattern of an age. We can only watch, study, and hope. And then she says, we'll talk later. And she whoosh, goes away. And they think to themselves, we have strangers, a gleeman, fireworks, and they found out there's going to be a peddler coming. And they knew at that moment, this is going to be the best bell time they've ever had. Chapter 3 is titled The Peddler. And as they're in town, a peddler comes in, a man with, his horses and his cart, and he introduces himself as Paden Fane. And he comes in, and everyone's so excited because he's the peddler. He comes once a year, and he's coming for Beltane. And he will sell them things and bring them news of the outside world, because the Two Rivers is a very isolated place. And no one really leaves or comes in, so it's excellent to get news from the outside. And Paden Fane is just reveling in all the attention that he's getting. And he tells them of a man in Gildan who has proclaimed himself to be the Dragon Reborn. And that very much disturbs everyone, because at this point you learn the dragon has prophecies regarding him. At some point the dragon will be reborn to seal away the Dark One again after he has broken free. But the prophecies say he will either save the world or break it once again. And so it is very upsetting that people have found a man calling himself the Dragon Reborn. And so Rand and Matt meet up with their friend Perrin. And Perrin, who you learn has worked at the blacksmith as an apprentice, so he is a very large boy, very large man in comparison to a lot of other people, like wide, very muscular, strong. He has also seen the Rider in Black. And they also find a girl, Egwene. And Egwene is the girl that Rand had a crush on. And Egwene says, you guys, I think you're making it up. And so there's not too much of import there. It's a lot of world building. So I'll move on to Chapter 4, The Gleeman. And so the Gleeman finds a room at the inn. And he introduces himself to everyone as Thom Merrilin. Tom spelled Thom. And he gets Egwene and the three boys to help him with his act. He does some juggling for everyone and some storytelling. And he asks for some, people want information about the Dragon Reborn, right? And he's like, that's old news. He's like, this is, like, even in Baerlon, the last place in the world you'd hear anything. And then he looks around, he's like, well, almost the last place. Excuse me. So he has stories he tells the audience. He has stories of great wars and great heroes for the men and boys. For the women and girls, the Apterigine cycle, tales of Arthur Pendrag Tenrail, Arthur Hawkwing, Arthur the High King, Arthur Hawkwing, who once ruled the land from the Aiel Waste all the way to the Aerith Ocean and beyond, the entire continent. Wondrous stories about strange people, strange lands, of the green man, of warders and Trollocs and Ogier and Aiel. Thousand tales of Anla, the wise counselor, Jane the giant slayer, how Susa tamed Jane Farstrider, Mara and the three foolish kings. And everyone gets so excited about everything, and Egwene yells out, "Tell us about Len, how he flew to the moon in the belly of an eagle made of fire. Tell about his daughter Salia walking among the stars." And he says, these are very old stories. And he says all this as he's juggling, right? He's like, stories from the age before the age of legends, some say. I have all stories, though, mind you. And as he's increasing his juggling potency, he says, "I will tell you of the end of the Age of Legends, of the dragon and his attempt to free the Dark One into the world of men. I will tell of the time of madness when the Aes Sedai shattered the world, of the Trolloc Wars when men battled Trollocs for rule of the earth, of the War of 100 Years when men battled men and the nations of our days were wrought. I will tell the adventures of men and women, rich and poor, great and small, proud and humble, the siege of the Pillars of the Sky, how Goodwife Kirill cured her husband of snoring, King Dareth and the fall," and then he stopped. And he sees Moraine in the distance. And he says, "I meant no disrespect." And Moraine says, "Everything is good. Don't worry about it." And Tom says, "Well, I hope you will like my stories." And she says, "That is a matter of taste, Master Bard. Some stories I like, some I do not." But as this conversation ends, Tom goes back to the crowd, and everyone's yelling at him to do different stuff. Juggle, eat fire, play the harp. All this good stuff. And Rand hears Tom mutter something about, like, a strong brandy. Like, Tom is like, "Ah, man, I need a drink." But he goes on, and he starts his performance. So, Tam, Rand's father, approaches them, and he talks about, the man in black, and Rand's like, "Shouldn't we even be worried?" And he's like, "Well, people have died in the past because they were sure something didn't happen or wouldn't happen, and then it did. Just don't start a confusion, and be ready to send help as needed." And Perrin at this point speaks up, and he's like, "Maybe the man is just a refugee from these wars going on in Gildan." But they're not, all three of them, necessarily convinced, and so they decide tomorrow we're going to go to the mayor and we're going to talk to him about it. And I believe at this point Moraine, I think in the earlier conversation when she saw the three boys, she also gave a coin to Perrin, asking him to be available for tasks as well. So she presses a coin into his hand. So all three of the boys now have a silver coin, which is a lot of money to them. Think like a copper is, like a silver is worth 10 coppers and a gold is worth 10 silvers kind of thing, And so as the nights, coming to a close here, Rand thinks to himself, Tam isn't necessarily too concerned. He's having a sharp eye out, he says. And Tam says, "I'll catch sight of him if he shows up, because there's a watch on the town to keep it safe." And Rand knows there's nothing that horseman could do to the people of Emond's Field couldn't handle. Chapter 5 is called Winter Night. Rand and Tam go back to their home, and they start cooking dinner. And Tam, thinking to himself, perhaps Rand is old enough, he pulls out from under his bed an old sword. And Rand didn't even know that Tam had a sword. And he sees it's marked with a heron. A heron being like a bird. And Tam is telling Rand, I just bought it at one point. But I almost sold it. Like, it's not much use in herding sheep. You can't plow a field or harvest a crop with it, right? But he's like, I'm just gonna keep it in case our luck runs out for some reason with all these strange things going on with the world and the thing that you're saying you see. I'll just keep it and be sure everything's okay. Anyway, the tea starts boiling, and so they're good, and there's a knock on the door. And so they're like, one of the neighbors, Master Jati wants to borrow something, but then they're like, I mean, Daughtry, their nearest neighbor, is an hour away, even in the daylight, and it's dark right now. They wouldn't be coming this dark. So he puts the stew that they made on the table and rests his hand on his sword hilt and says, I don't think... Boom. The door bursts open, the iron lock spins across the floor, and a large figure fills the entire doorway, larger than anything any man Rand had ever seen. A sole figure in black chainmail that hung down to his knees, spikes at his wrists and elbows and shoulders, one hand clutching a heavy scythe-like sword, the other hand flung up as if to shield his eyes from the light. And Rand felt an odd relief. Whoever this was, it was not the black-cloaked rider. But then he noticed the curled ram's horns on the head that brushed the top of the doorway, and where a mouth and nose should have been, there was a hairy muzzle. He took all this in the space of a single breath and yelled and chucked the hot kettle at the half-human head, and the creature roared, screamed in pain, but also snarling like an animal as the boiling water smashed on his face. And as quickly as that happened, Tam pulled out his sword, runs up to it, and suddenly a head topples to the floor, and two huge bodies block the door. And he realizes Tam is yelling at Rand. Run, lad. Hide in the woods. There's too many to hold. Out the back. I'll follow. And Rand sprints away, feeling great shame as he runs, but he knows there's nothing he could do against multiple of these giant creatures. And he sprints away. As he yells to Tam, Run, father, run! He grabs a hoe from the barn, thinking it's better than nothing. His sheep are terrified, trying to find an escape because they can smell or sense something nearby that is terrifying to them. And then suddenly a window bursts open with glass everywhere as Tam leaped through it with the sword still in his hand, and he lands and sprints away. Rand yells, I'm over here, and Tam runs at him, but says, hide! Like, God, come on, man. And then they get to hiding, and he's like, well, Rand thinks to himself, the hoe handle won't be very useful, but it's the best he can do, it's basically like a quarterstaff, as best as you can get. And Tam tells Rand, these are Trollocs. I don't know what brought them to the two rivers. A Trolloc, and he tries quickly, as if trying to give Rand as much information in little time as possible. He says, a Trolloc can see better than a man in the dark, but bright lights blind them, for a time at least. That may be the only reason we got away. Some of them can track by scent or sound, but they're also said to be lazy. If we can just hide long enough, they should give up. Trollocs kill for the pleasure of killing. And they cannot be trusted unless they're afraid of you. And they're terrified, and Tam is saying, I need to rest. Rand takes Tam's sword to let Tam rest a little bit. He draws it, and it feels odd in his hand, never having a sword. He does a few little slashes into the air, but he's very nervous. Rand realizes he needs to get Tam some blankets, and so he goes back to the house after promising Tam he'll be careful. And he's nervous that the Trollocs will still be there after this small amount of time, but they seem to have gone. And he goes in there, and as he's looking for the blankets and everything, he hears a scraping sound behind him, and he almost falls over, but he doesn't. And one of the Trollocs that was there was getting to his feet, and it muttered something and said, others go away, Narg stay, Narg smart. And the words were hard to understand. Narg knows some come back sometimes. Narg wait, you no need sword, put sword down. Narg no hurt, you put sword down. Rand says, stay back. Why'd you do this? Why? The snarl became a toothy smile. Put sword down, Narg no hurt. Myrddraal want to talk you. Others come back, you talk Myrddraal. You put sword down. And Rand freezes. He wets his lips and he says, Myrddraal, the worst of the stories. If a fade was coming, it made a Trolloc pale by comparison. He knew he had to get away at that moment, but the Trolloc drew a massive... If the Trolloc drew a massive blade that he had, Rand wouldn't stand a chance. So he says, all right, I'll talk. The wolf smile on the Trolloc became a snarl, and the Trolloc lunged for him, not believing Rand's deceit. And quickly, Rand brings the sword up, and the monstrous body crashed into him, slamming him against the wall. All the breath left his lungs in a single grasp, and he's fighting for air as they fall to the floor together with the Trolloc on top. And as he struggled beneath the crushing weight, the snapping jaws, the Trolloc spasmed and was still, and Rand could only lay there in disbelief. He had killed the Trolloc. He goes back and he realizes Tam is injured. He was very badly injured by the Trollocs. And so he peels off his shirt and tries to tend to Tam's wound, thinking they just had to get to the village. Nynaeve, the wisdom, would be able to cure Tam. All he had to do was get him there. Chapter 6 is titled The Westwood. And so Rand is just dragging Tam through the woods to Emond's Field on a board. In a very plain cart. And he notices in the distance a black-cloaked rider, and they pause, and the cloaked rider continues on. And Rand is very much relieved. And Tam is feverish, and he's rambling, and Rand is listening to him, and as in his rambles, Tam speaks about how he actually found Rand as a baby orphaned on the side of a mountain. And a chill goes down Rand's spine, thinking, no, Tam is my father. And Tam says, battles are always hot. You know, Tam's talking about this through his, delirium, right? He's, on the verge of death at this point, and every breath is a pant. And he says, battles are always hot, even in the snow. Sweat, heat, blood, heat, only death is cool. Slope of the mountain, only place didn't stink of death. Had to get away from smell of it, sight of it. Heard a baby cry. Their women fight alongside the men sometimes, but why they had let her come, I don't. Gave birth there alone, before she died of her wounds. Covered the child with her cloak, but the wind blown the cloak away. Child blue with the cold, should have been dead too. Crying there, crying in the snow. I couldn't just leave a child, no child of our own. Always knew you wanted children. I knew I'd take it to your heart, Kari. Yes, lass, Rand is a good name. A good name. And Rand stumbles to his knees and knows, if a Trolloc had leaped up in front of him right then, all he would have done is stare at it. And he thinks to himself, Tam is my father. It's only a fever dream. He's my father. It's only a fever dream. Light, who am I? As Rand and Tam approach the city... Oh, this is Chapter 7, titled Out of the Woods. As Rand and Tam approach, not city, the village of Emond's Field, they find it in ashes. Most of the buildings are either on fire or clearly already burned down. And they find the dead around. It seems the village was also attacked by Trollocs. They go to the wisdom, Nynaeve, who believes Tam cannot be saved. The wound is too great. Through this conversation, and through others, Rand learns that Moraine, the lady stranger who came with the man Lan, is an Aes Sedai. a wielder of the magic called the One Power, which is split between the male half and the female half. And as everyone knows by this time, all Aes Sedai are female, because if a man were to channel, they would touch a taint that is on the male half of the One Power, and this taint would drive them to madness, and eventually they would break the world once again. And so Rand goes up to Moiraine, asking her, "Please, can you heal my father?" Rand tells her, "I will pay any price in my power if you help him. Anything." And Moiraine says, "We will speak of prices later, Rand, if at all. I make no promises. I'll see what I can do. But it is beyond my power to stop the wheel from turning." And the man Lan, who at this point is clearly identified as her warder, a man with a cloak that shifts with the color around him, making him almost invisible when he stands still, and he's still incredibly difficult to see when moving. He states, "Death comes sooner or later to everyone, unless they serve the Dark One, and only fools are willing to pay that price." But Moiraine agrees to go to her father, and Rand, as they walk, says, "Please, quickly." And she says, "I am coming as quick as I can, Rand, I promise you." And as they walk, he tries not to think about what price she may exact from him. Chapter 8 is titled A Place of Safety. They go to the inn which Tam is at, as that's where Rand left him when he went to search for Nynaeve and then Moiraine. And he thinks to himself, in the stories, Aes Sedai wonders were always accompanied by flashes and thunderclaps or other signs to indicate mighty works. The power, the One Power, drawn from the true source that drove the wheel of time. And that wasn't something Rand really wanted to think about, the power being involved with Tam. Rand didn't even want to be in the same room as where the power was being used. Having it in the village is bad enough. And yet, as he thought all this, all Moiraine did was kneel over Tam and rest her hands on his chest, and didn't make a move nor make a sound. And he was focused so deeply on it that when Lan softly spoke to him, Rand jumped up into the air, startled, and Lan says, quietly, so not to distract Moiraine, "That is a fine weapon you wear. Is there by chance a heron on the blade as well?" And he says, "Yes, there is." And he says, I'd have not thought to find a heron-marked sword in a place like this. Strange thing for a sheep herder." And by this point, Rand is wondering, is Moiraine even doing anything? But Lan keeps talking and says, "There are places where the heron is a symbol of the master swordsman. That blade must have traveled a strange road to end up with a sheep herder in the Two Rivers." At this point, Rand brings up the man. A man in the woods who made people afraid just by looking at him. And he asks, "Hey, if you had been told about a man like this, would this have warned you of anything? Could you have stopped this?" And Moiraine speaks up, "Not without a dozen or a half dozen of my sister Aes Sedai." And she knelt by the bed but took her hands off of Tam. And she turns towards Rand and says, "If I thought I would find Trollocs and Myrddraal here, I would have bought a half dozen of my sisters. A dozen if I had to drag them by the scruff of their necks. But honestly, a month's warning by myself would have made little to no difference. There's a limit to what someone can do, even one wielding the One Power, and there were probably well over 100 Trollocs in the district last night." She says, "That accursed raven yesterday, the way it behaved, should have warned me." Rand looks in confusion, and Rand says, "The Dark One's minions often find spies among creatures that feed on death. Ravens and crows, mainly. Rats in the cities sometimes." And Rand shivers. Ravens and crows as spies of the Dark One? But there were ravens and crows everywhere now. The Dark One's touch, Moiraine had said. The Dark One was always there, he knew that, but if you tried to walk in the light, tried your best to live a good life, and you didn't name the Dark One, he could not harm you, or so everyone believed. And he looks back at Tam, and his face is less flushed than before, his breathing almost normal. "You've done it!" And Moraine sighs, "Not yet. I hope it is only not yet. Trolloc weapons are made at forges in the valley called Thakandar, on the very slopes of Shayol Ghul itself. Some of them take a taint from that place, a stain of evil in the metal. Those tainted blades make wounds that will not heal unaided, or they will cause deadly fevers, strange sicknesses that medicines cannot touch. I've soothed your father's pain, but the taint is still in him. Left alone, it will grow again and consume him." And Rand says, "But you won't leave it alone." And it was like a half plea, half command. And she says, "I will not, but I am very tired, Rand, and I have had no chance to rest since last night." She pulls out a little item, says, "This is an angreal. We have lost the making of these. So much is lost, perhaps never to be found again. So few remain, the Amerlin seat almost didn't allow me to take this one. But it is well for you and your father that she did give permission. And you learn from this, this smooth ivory figure that she's holding, no longer than her hand, of a woman in like flowing robes, was a relic from the Age of Legends that allowed Aes Sedai in history to perform their greatest wonders of legends." Lan speaks up and says, "The rider, based on your description, that was a Myrddraal." And Rand says, "But Fades are 20 feet tall," and Lan starts grinning at him. "Sometimes sheepherder stories make things larger than truth. Believe me, the truth is big enough with a half-man. Half-man, Lurk, Fade, Shadowman, the name depends on the land you're in, but they all mean Myrddraal. Fades are Trolloc spawn, throwbacks to almost to the human stock the Dreadlords used to make Trollocs. But if the human strain is made stronger, so too is the taint on the Trolloc, and half-mans have a power sort of stems from the Dark One. Only the weakest Aes Sedai would fail to be a match for a Fade, but many a good man and true has fallen to them. Since the wars that ended the Age of Legends, since the Forsaken were bound, they have been the brain that tells the Trollocs where to strike. In the days of the Trolloc Wars, half-men led the Trollocs in battle under the Dreadlords." And Rand says, he scared me. Lan tells him, "No need for shame, sheepherder. They scare me too." And then Rand tells him about the Trolloc attack and how he stabbed the Trolloc and killed it. And Lan says, even as an accident, that is something to speak of. Until last night, there were few men south of the borderlands who could say they had seen a Trolloc, much less killed one. At this point, Moraine, very tired, says, "It is done. Lan, help me up." Tam's skin at this point was cool to the touch, and Rand asks, "Will he be all right?" Moraine says, "Yes, a few weeks in bed and he'll be as good as ever." Moraine then explains, "In the Age of Legends, some Aes Sedai could fan life and health to flame if only the smallest spark remained. Those days are gone, though, perhaps forever. So much was lost, not just the making of Angriel, so much that could be done, which we dare not even dream of if we remembered it all. There are far fewer Aes Sedai now. Some talents are all but gone, and many remain are weaker. But there must be both will and strength for the body to draw on, or even the strongest of us can do nothing for healing. It is fortunate your father is strong in body and spirit, but as it is, he used up much of that strength in this fight for life. All that is left now is for him to recuperate. The taint is gone." Rand tells her, "I can never repay you, but I'll do anything as long as it doesn't hurt my village or friends." And Moraine says, "I would like to talk with you anyway. You'll no doubt leave at the same time as me, and we can speak then." And Rand's like, "Leave? Where would we go? Peyton Faint said the weather is just as bad everywhere. The peddler, the Trollocs, Tom Maryland. The best I can do right now is stay where we are in the Two Rivers, put things together. We have crops, has to be warm enough to shear the sheep soon. I don't know who started this talk about leaving, but..." And then Lan says, "Sheepherder, you talk when you should be listening." And he realized he was babbling. And then Moraine tells him, "I have handled this badly, I see. I should have rested first. To clarify, it is you who will be leaving Rand, not your village. You who must leave for the sake of your village. And Rand doesn't understand. And Lan then speaks up and says, did you know that some homes were not attacked? And Rand's like, half the village is in ashes. Lan says some houses were only torched to create confusion. The Trollocs ignored them later. 2 farms were attacked, yours and one other. It was yours and the Ibarra farm. And Ibarra, we know Ariel, belongs to Perrin. Perrin Ibarra is his name. And Rand says, that's crazy. And Moiraine says, it is purposeful, not crazy. They didn't come here by chance. And they didn't do it for the pleasure of killing and burning, even if that is what they do. The Trollocs came to kill or capture young men of a certain age who live in this area. And he's like, my age? Mat? What about Perrin? And they say, they're alive and well. Moiraine then explains, there is something in one of you, or all 3, that the Dark One fears. Rand doesn't believe this. I'm a shepherd. The Dark One can't be interested in me. Lan says it took a great deal of effort to bring so many Trollocs so far without raising a hue and cry from the borderlands to Camlin and beyond. I wish I knew how they did it. Do you really believe they went through all that bother just to burn a few houses? And Moiraine says, I could send to Tar Valon for some of my sisters. They might have time to make the journey we need. But the Myrddraal knows I'm here too. I might not attack openly right now. But it may not take one battle. It may take even many and much time. And they may attack before them. And Rand starts to accept. Like he lost his grip on something he was holding deep in his heart. He says, that's why I have to leave, isn't it? The Trollocs won't come back if I'm not here. And he says, I used to daydream about seeing Camlin. I never thought it would come about like this. But Moiraine says, Camlin is not a place of safety, despite the walls. In Tar Valon, you will be among Aes Sedai warders. Even during the Trolloc Wars, the Dark One's forces feared to attack its shining walls. Their one attempt was their greatest defeat until the end of the war. Tar Valon holds all the knowledge we Aes Sedai have gathered since the time of madness. Some fragments even date from the Age of Legends. In Tar Valon, if anywhere, you will be able to learn why the Myrddraal want you, why the Father of Lies wants you. That I can promise. Chapter 9 is titled Tellings of the Wheel. Rand goes to sleep, but in it he finds himself in a city, a very confusing city. And as he walks, there's no one around until he dreams the Dark One is chasing him. And it chases him into this beautiful white city and traps him in it. There is no escape. And in it he finds a man with fire in his eyes. A voice tells him, it is your destiny. The whisper says, your destiny, it said, almost eager. And he kept going, and he climbed stairs in front of him. And at the top, the doors swung open. He went inside, and he sees a Myrddraal, and it says, we have been waiting for you. Rand bolts upright, waking up, shivering, and sees Tam still asleep on the bed. Eventually, he touches Tam's forehead, and Tam opens his eyes. He finds out that the people in the town, Egwene's parents who own the inn, have been taking care of Tam while Rand slept. Rand explains what has happened to the Trollocs. They destroyed the farm, they killed the sheep, the cow. And Rand starts telling him everything he can. And then Tam asks, say it exactly as she said it. And he says, you see, lad, Aes Sedai are tricksome. They don't lie, not right out. But the truth an Aes Sedai tells you is not always the truth you think it is. You take care around her. Rand says, I'm not a child. And Tam says, so you're not. And he wishes he could go with, but knows that he cannot, injured like this. Rand starts to unbuckle the sword, and Tam says, keep it. You have more need of it than I, although the light willing, neither of us will end up needing it. Take care, lad. And Rand hugs him and says, I will come back. I promise you that. And Tam laughs. Of course you will, I know that. And I'll have twice as many sheep for you to tend when you return. Now go, before that fellow over there does himself an injury. As he walks over to Lan. Outside the inn as they leave, they hear the old man, Senbui, yelling, "Get out!" He, clearly upset, is yelling, "Get out! Drive her out! We want no Aes Sedai troubles! Why did they come if not for her?" And everyone scowls at him. Moraine picks up her staff, spins it with both hands, and white flame flares from the ends of the staff. Everyone scampers away, giving her distance, and she snaps her arm straight down in front of her, staff parallel to the ground, but pale fire still jetting out, brighter than torches. Everyone shied away, shielded their eyes from the pain of that brilliance, and she says, "Is this what Aemon's blood has come to? Little people squabbling for the right to hide like rabbits? You have forgotten who you were, forgotten what you were, but I had hoped some small part was left, some memory in blood and bone, some shred to steel you for the long night coming." And a man says, "Forgotten who we are? We're who we've always been, farmers and shepherds and craftsmen, two rivers folk." Moraine says, "To the south lies the river you call the White River, but far to the east of here men still call it by its rightful name, Mantherendrel, in the old tongue, waters of the mountain home, sparkling waters that once coursed through a land of bravery and beauty. 2,000 years ago, Mantherendrel flowed like by the walls of a mountain city, so lovely to behold. Ogier stonemasons came to stare in wonder. Farms and villages covered this region, and now, and that area you call the Forest of Shadows as well, and beyond. But all those folks thought of themselves as people of the mountain home, the people of Manetheren. Their king was Aemon Alcar el-Thorin, Aemon, son of Car, son of Thorin, and Eldrin Elyan I Carlin was his queen. Aemon, a man, you don't need to remember all those, but Aemon, a man so fearless that the greatest compliment for courage any could give, even among his enemies, was to say a man had Aemon's heart. Eldrine, so beautiful, it was said the flowers bloomed to make her smile, bravery and beauty and wisdom, and a love that death could not sunder. Weep if you have a heart for the loss of them, for the loss of even their memory. Weep for the loss of their blood. For nearly 2 centuries, the Trolloc Wars have ravaged the length and breadth of the world, and wherever battles raged, the Red Eagle banner of Manetheren was in the forefront. The men of Manetheren were a thorn to the Dark One's foot and a bramble to his hand. Sing of Manetheren, that would never bend knee to the shadow. Sing of Manetheren, the sword that could not be broken. They were far away, the men of Manetheren, on the field of Becker, called the Field of Blood, when news came that a Trolloc army was moving against their home. Too far to do else but wait to hear of their land's death, for the forces of the Dark One meant to make an end to them. Kill the mighty oak by hacking away its roots, too far to do else but mourn. But they were men of the mountain home. Without hesitation, without thought for the distance they must travel, they marched from the very field of victory, still covered in dust and sweat and blood. Day and night they marched, for they had seen the horror of a Trolloc army left behind it, and no man of them could sleep while such a danger threatened Manetheren. They moved as if their feet had wings, marching further and faster than friends hoped or enemies feared. At any other day, that march alone would have inspired songs. When the Dark One's army swooped upon the lands of Manetheren, the men of the mountain home stood before it with their backs to the Terendrel. The villagers at this point, and by the way, Ariel, if you haven't gotten it, I'm reading this part because this is like massive world-building lore. The villagers at this point cheer at them being there in time, but Moraine continued on. The host that faced the men of Manetheren was enough to daunt the bravest heart. Ravens blackened the sky, Trollocs blackened the land, Trollocs and their human allies, Trollocs and dark friends in tens of thousands, and dreadlords to command. At night their cook fires outnumbered the stars, and dawn revealed the banner of Baalzamon at their head. Baalzamon, Heart of the Dark, an ancient name for the father of lies. The Dark One could not have been free of his prison at Sheol, for if he had been, not all the forces of humankind together could have stood against him. But there was power there, dreadlords and some evil that made light-destroying banners seem no more than right, and sent a chill into the souls of the men who faced it. Yet they knew what they must do. Their homeland lay just across the river. They must keep that host and the power with it from the mountain home. Aemon had sent out messengers. Aid was promised if they could hold for but 3 days at the Terendrel. Hold for 3 days against odds that should overwhelm them in the first hour. Yet somehow, through bloody assault and desperate defense, they held through an hour, and the second hour, and the third. For 3 days they fought, and though the land became a butcher's yard, no crossing of the Terendrel did they yield. But by the third night, no help had come, and no messengers, and they fought on alone. For 6 days. For 9. And on the 10th day, Aemon knew the bitter taste of betrayal. No help was coming, and they could hold the river crossing no more. Someone in the crowd yells, "What did they do?" Torchfires flickered in the chill night breeze, but no one made a move to draw a cloak tighter. Moraine said, Aemon crossed the Terendrel, destroying the bridges behind him, and he sent word throughout his land for the people to flee, for he knew the powers with the Trolloc horde would find a way to bring it across the river. Even as the word went out, Trolloc's crossing began, and the soldiers of Manetheren took up the fight again, to buy with their lives what hours they could for their people to escape. From the city of Manetheren, Eldrine organized the flight of her people into the darkest forests and the fastest of the mountains. But some did not flee. First in a trickle, then a river, then a flood, men went not to safety, but to join the army fighting for their land, shepherds with bows, and farmers with pitchforks, and woodsmen with axes. Women went too, shouldering what weapons they could find and marching side by side with their men. No one made that journey who did not know they would never return. But it was their land. It had been their fathers', and it would be their children's, and they went to pay the price of it. Not a step of ground was given up until it was soaked in blood. But at last, the army of Manetheren was driven back to here, to this place you now call Emond's Field, and here the Trolloc horde surrounded them. At this time, Moraine's voice held the sound of cold tears. Trolloc dead and the corpses of human renegades piled up in mounds, but always more scrambled over their carnal heaps in waves of death that had no end. There could be but one finish. No man or woman who had stood beneath the banner of the Red Eagle at that day's dawning still lived when night fell. The sword that could not be broken was shattered. In the mountains of mist, alone in an empty city of Manetheren, Eldrine felt Aemon die, and her heart died with him. And where her heart had been was left only a thirst for vengeance, vengeance for her love, vengeance for the people and her land. Driven by grief, she reached out to the true source and hurled the one power at the Trolloc army, and their dreadlords died wherever they stood, whether in their secret councils or exhorting their soldiers. In the passing of a breath, the dreadlords and the generals of the Dark One's host burst into flames. Fires consumed their bodies, and terror consumed their just victorious army. And now they ran like beasts before a wildfire in the forest, no thought for anything but escape. North and south they fled, thousands drowned attempting to cross the Terendrel without the aid of the dreadlords. And at the Marathendel they tore down the bridges in their fright at what might be following them. Where they found people, they slew and burned, but to flee was the need that gripped them, until at last no one of them remained in the lands of Manetheren. They were dispersed like dust before the whirlwind. The final vengeance came more slowly, but it came when they were hunted down by other peoples, by other armies in other lands. None was left alive of those who did murder at Aemon's Field. But the price was high for Manetheren. Eldrine had drawn to herself more of the one power than any human could ever hope to wield unaided. As the enemy generals died, so did she die, and the fires that consumed her consumed the empty city of Manatharin, even the stones of it down to the living rock of the mountains. Yet the people had been saved. Nothing was left of their farms, their villages, or their great city. Some would say there was nothing left for them, nothing but to flee to other lands where they could begin anew. They did not say so. They had paid such a price in blood and hope for their land as had never been paid before, and now they were bound to that soil by ties stronger than steel. Other wars would rack them in years to come, until at last their corner of the world was forgotten, and at last they had forgotten wars and the way of war. Never again did Manatharin rise. Its soaring spires and splashing fountains became as a dream that slowly faded from the minds of its people. But they and their children and their children's children held the land that was theirs. They held it when the long centuries had washed the why of it from their memories. They held it until, today, there is you. Weep for Manatharin. Weep for what was lost forever. Lan pulls Rand and says, "Let's go, boy." And Rand realizes this was the real beginning, leaving the inn, following the warder Lan into the night, and he firmed his resolve. But he knew he would come back to Emond's Field, however far or long this journey was. Trying to convince himself that he was beginning a grand adventure, Rand followed them through the darkened kitchen and out into the stable yard.